Chapter 24, The Price of Power. In September 1924, Lilias wrote, I suppose that the natural result of living at such high pressure since the end of March is to find oneself in low water. Such low water that there is every hope that God is going to do something great. Weak in Him are such wonderful words. For after all, the world's salvation was not wrought out by the 33 years in which he went about doing good, but in those 3 hours when he hung in utter exhaustion till his heart broke. So little wonder if, for us, the price of power is weakness. She never rallied physically, but for the next 3.5 years that long, low, flower-filled bedroom, with its windows opening to the sunrise, became a power center for the whole mission, a place where spirits were renewed and souls caught fire and saw visions. And as the members of the band traveled far and wide across the land, they knew themselves upheld in prayer every step of the way from that room where Reba Bratting tried in vain to protect her patient from the ceaseless coming and going that was part of the life of Dar Nama. For it was a time unprecedented expansion, and 1925 opens with a song of praise. Lilias wrote, It is good to wake to the new year with the joy of last night's telegram, telling that Telemedicine to the Far East had become another center for him. The very weakness of the new venture, just one woman, marks it as his choice. But telemedicine proved suspicious and standoffish until Mr. Theobald arrived, and by dint of getting his boots muddied and polished over and over again, made friends at last with the ringleader of the shoeblacks. Others followed, and their hearts were won. Lying on her bed, Lilias dreams of another van for coal porter to work, a printing press, and that Christian Zonia Alma Krebs had been invalided at home, and the Buckinghams and the Theobalds had left their stations in favor of itineranting work. But Violet Woods had gone to Tozier with her sister, and was reaching crowds with a primitive medical clinic, reporting 993 child cases in 2 months. Alice McElroy and Mule Beatkaz had explored a new area and come to pour out their excitement at the bedside. The strategic point of Belsaida had sprung into being through a new line connecting Algiers with Tozier and Tolga. A perfect halfway house, they assured her, and a house had been offered. A house was taken. Belsaida was a small town, but it boasted a large Muslim fraternity house. The priests watched the gentle, gracious lives of the new residents, and the climax came a year later when Mr. Theobald and C. Sultan arrived on a visit and were invited to speak a week in the fraternity center and encouraged to discuss religion and distribute literature to the 500 students residing there. By that time, the van of Lilias' dreams had traveled thousands of miles and distributed thousands of pieces of Christian literature, and the team, Mr. Buckingham, Mr. Theobald, C. Sultan, and Pierre Nicode, had wonderful stories to pour out on each exhausted, dusty homecoming. C. Sultan was truly God's gift to them, for he had committed his whole life wholly to Christ, just in time, after years of vacillating and compromise. His decision was made at Belaid's funeral, Belaid being one of the few who had followed the Lord faithfully from boyhood till the day of his death. Standing in the crowd, C. Sultan had felt the call to be baptized for the dead, but when asked to give a word of testimony, he felt he could not do it. All he could see were the glaring eyes of the bystanders, and to his excited fancy they seemed to have great knotted clubs in their hands. Then it came to him, I can only die once, and he spoke out fearlessly. From that day all fear vanished, and believing in the God who had kept the crowd silent that day, he continued to witness unflinching. He gladly joined the young men in the van, and town after town, and God used his astute native mind and tongue, especially in Kolia, where the Buckinghams had lived for a time, learning the language. It was a religious center, but those lives of love, humility, and prayer had been noticed, and the people welcomed them back. 40 men collected in a cafe that night, and when St. at the end of his talk, asked them to join him in a prayer for forgiveness in the name of Jesus, all hands were stretched out spontaneously, palms upward in the native fashion of petition. That same evening, the same group summoned the coal porters to the largest cafe in the town with an audience of 200, including the French brigadier and 2 policemen. Mr. Theobald put on a lantern show, and St. made the last plea. "We must act," he cried, pointing to the last picture, the lost sheep and the seeking shepherd. The shepherd waited for that bleat, and then he ran. "Come, let us all bleat to the Lord." And again there was a hush, and the outstretching of the hands as Sultan confessed their sin, and wondering and pleaded the name of Jesus. He could make them laugh too. "You think you can get to heaven by fasting," he would say? "Then there must be many camels in heaven. They can fast for 3 days at a time." And he could sell more books than anyone else, with his ready repartee. "I will not buy this book," said one fanatic, handing it back. "It has not got in the name of God written on it as the Quran has." "When you drink a cup of coffee," reported Sultan, "you do not look to see what is written on the cup. You say, 'In the name of God,' and drink the coffee. Do the same with this book." Mr. Theobald and Mr. Colazion, a possible new recruit, again visited Oued Suif. And then, as before, the books were remembered and received with joy. Lilias, hearing the news, decided that the time had come for the prayers of the 3 years past to be answered. One afternoon she talked to 2 recent newcomers, Millie Pages, a French lady brought up in Algeria, knowing both French and Arabic, Maud Walton from England. They prayed over the situation, and it began to open up like a flower, said Lilias. Within 2 months they were off. The first letter telling of the journey was unpromising, for, to quote the diary, "Worn out with fatigue, in the middle of the long 180-mile journey on camelback, Millie Page lost her balance and fell backward. There must have been an angel saving her from concussion or a broken neck, for she fell on her head, and the next camel all but stepped on her. But the dear woman, although much shaken, mounted again and finished the journey, and at the end of the day she was fit enough to read with only intelligent camel driver." Next, the first rain fell in torrents, and that meant soaking garments and wet bedding. Praise the Lord for both of them. The next letter gave little comfort, but it thrilled Lilias, who cut out the postmark and stuck it to her diary, for it showed that the star of hope that had always hung over Oued Suif was the true lodestar. The ladies wrote out that the headman had received them kindly, but had no house to give them, so they had been taken into an empty fundak in the inn where the poor and the donkeys camp in small shelters round an open area, and given 3 small unplastered rooms with no doors. The notables came to pay their respects. Coffee and cake arrived, but after they were left to themselves, Millie Pages was writing by a bonfire when Maud and a friendly Frenchman struggled to erect a tent. Maud, however, announced that she was extremely happy, having traveled for 10 days on a saddle of her own, making and feeling less tired every day. She wrote, "It is beautiful that with Christians so near, the star should be once more shine out over Fundak. It is the first Christmas Oued Suif has ever known. This Fundak is the roughest little unplastered, windowless room with sand floors and nothing else. I wonder if there is a manger in one of them." The young women settled well. Maud visited and did medical work, and there was no lack of callers from morning till night. She and Millie Pages considered their Fundak absolutely perfect. We have no discomfort except for on cold nights when we miss a door. Some here are ill with a cold, but we are so well, and we have oft reached about 70 patients a day. The medical work is fully appreciated by the whole population and by the military doctor of the Sahara district. The cooperation of preaching and healing seems to be the way. We are filled with thankfulness and wonder too why we did not come sooner. Away in the Azure Mountains, Alice McElroy and Mil Boutcaz were making their 5th sojourn, coming and going and coming again till the people got used to them, and they could apply for a permanent foothold. Alice McElroy wrote, "Lord, now lettest thy servant depart in peace, has been the cry of my heart since Thursday, for the prayers of the past 3 years have been fulfilled, and those seemingly ungettable villages have been reached, and the scriptures and tracts left in every one of them. There have been wonderful times of listening, when we knew that the Spirit of God was at work. We rested in the Syed's house, and he took us to visit the mosque school. We were allowed to distribute tracts there and in the little mosque." So while Lilias's body rested in bed, her heart and mind traveled all the way, south, east, and west, with her team. She did not seem to worry about those young, unprotected women going off for weeks into wild, unexplored places, for she trusted God, and she trusted them, and believed that their good consisted in laying down their lives daily for Christ and his gospel. She once said, "If I have failed, it is because I have often not acted on the principle that he who would help men must demand something of them." She demanded much of when things went wrong or the price seemed high. She offered little sympathy, although much prayerful care. She had taught them to be joyful in tribulation, and of them it might have been written, as it is written, the followers of Sir Francis of Assisi. Because they had chosen to follow the way, the breath of heaven was about them, and they knew, even in defeat and pain and fear, the meaning of joy. It was Christ's resurrection gift to them, who said, "Your joy no man taketh from you." But in the thought of Francis, it was also a command, as much as so far as the command to be poor and humble. It was their business to see that their joy was not taken from them. It was a flame to be tended, and if it went out to be immediately lit again, he knew that there was no better armor against sin than joy. She had instilled into them from the day they arrived the enormous importance of unity, and it is interesting to notice how they went forth so readily with differing companions. She recognized and rejoiced over close friendships, as the following entry shows. A joyful talk with Mabel and Maud over their Beni Mezab experience. The deep heart fusion over the work was evident, and the union in prayer that has brought about these small miracles. But it was unlikely that Mabel and Maud would be sent out together again, and in spite of different couples being completely shut up to each other in the primitive accommodations of the outstations, there are no records of personality clashes. Maybe they had learned to fear them as much as she had, for she shared her thoughts freely with them. The whole subject lit up for her afresh as she studied the Levitical offerings. The meat offering is fraught with a warning note, for it seems to mean the life of sacrifice, not as the burnt offering, perfect before God, but perfected in human relationships. Twice already in the years out here we have seen God draw very near a mighty outpouring of his Spirit, and then the overflow has been checked, and it has sunk, as it were, into barren sand because of some failure to love or forbearance, some looking to our own things rather than to the things of others, even our own holy things, in which, alas, iniquity may be found if we hold them apart from God. And when the rifts did come, she taught them to forgive. And for her, forgiveness was a task not to be taken lightly. She loved the quote, "To forgive is more than a matter of speech. It is the full-blooded energy of life work for the full of deliverance of another life. To forgive a man is to deliver a man, and that will require your thought, your prayer, your speech, and your deeds." Chapter 25. Fulfillment. It was good to lean back on the pillows and look back over the years and trace God's retrievals. She noted them down as a tonic to the faith of the band. In Colia, Mr. Branding and Mr. Pope were stoned out of the city in 1904. In Delhi's, a few years later, Madame Arnault and May Olives were ordered to leave. In Bayusada, Lilias and Blanche had been escorted by the police to the departing train. In Tolga, 1902, the same couple were ordered out and forbidden to return. In the Aries Mountains, the people had been forbidden to sell them bread or supply mules. Cold, footsore, and very weary, Blanche and Lilias had beat a retreat. And yet that little card sent on the morning of their departure from Tolga and proved true. Il y a un avenir. There is a sequel. Lilias had clung to that promise over the years and had seen it fulfilled. Each of those towns was now wide open and lay in the very line of advance that seemed to be pointed out by God. She felt prayer to be the vital to the work as breath to the body, and she worked hard during the last years of her life to reinforce that network of supporting prayer all around her mission. She set aside a small whitewashed room in Darnama as a prayer room. The little Sunday morning meeting for men was provided with a blackboard on which to write prayer requests, and this was hailed with great enthusiasm. Visitors and residents were urged to take up the burden, and the house in Rue Crescent was finally closed. She was delighted to welcome old Mr. Smeaton to the basement of Darnama. She wrote, Mr. Buckingham spends part of the week helping him with his blind, and it is beautiful to think of those dear brothers praying down there. It hastens the time when this shall be, as it should be, the powerhouse of the work. Quiet days of prayer were often held in her bedroom, and sometimes they were far from quiet. A great sense of pressure and darkness had to be fought through at the start. Then it lifted, and God's power was set free and was, we all felt, intensely vivid. Prayer was concentrated on releasing at all costs the Holy Spirit. In those last days, frail in body but crystal clear in mind and spirit, prayer had become her very life. She would talk eagerly of creative hours with God. Concerning the work of my hands, command ye me, is the Old Testament foreshadowing of these creative hours of which, with our poor, tentative, calculating faith, we know so little. But to command is to know the will of the Father, and it has come to me with new light and power that the first thing we have to be sure of day by day is that our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. If we can listen in the stillness till our hearts begin to vibrate to what He is feeling about the matter in question, whether it concerns ourselves or others, we can, from that moment, begin to pray down from His throne. Much of our prayers centered on the converts with their fears and struggles, and she took great pains to provide prayer partners for each one. Ali, who fled from his hostile family in Tozer, was a case in point. She wrote, that Ali should have been delivered from drug poisoning so quickly and thoroughly is due, I believe, to the special prayer around him in Eastbourne, where they have harnessed themselves to him in a way that has brought victory again and again. But the battle for Ali went on month after month. Homesick and discouraged, he planned to give up his work and return to Tozer, where his family had turned him out of the house when he had become a Christian. But to do that, he would have to recant his faith and live as a Muslim. As he thought about it, he decided to go halfway and seek for fresh work in Souak Abras, the junction of Tozer. But shortly after leaving, he returned, unable to explain why, until one night he sat by Lilias's bed and understood. She wrote, a talk with Ali today brought a fresh recognition of the power that is ours to wield. I told him how concerned I was when I heard that Souak Abras was his goal, knowing that it is close to Tozer, and that, if no work was found, the temptation to return home would be too strong for him. I told him how I had, by prayer, definitely put the cross of Christ as a barrier between him and the south. He looked struck. Yes, he said, I felt when I got there and found no work that two ways lay before me, the way south and the way west. But it seemed as though a great wall lay between me and Tozer, and the gate was barred, so I turned back west. And always continually she prayed for fellow workers as they set off with high hopes and courageous hearts to the places where she longed to travel. Mr. Buckingham and Monsieur Thurbold started this morning with the Tetleys to itinerate Boasada. It is a joy year by year to set up our banners, not for defense merely, but for assault on the enemy lines. And for me, there is that wrestling from the enemy for Christ, though the long night hours that intervene somewhat wearily between the night meals. This appears to be the only time that she admitted, even to her diary, the length and weariness of those night hours. She seemed in those last years to be carrying 3 special prayer burdens laid by her Lord. The first was a shelter for young divorced women, often terribly abused, and whose only future was to be sold again by their families. This never really materialized apart from the sheltering of 1 or 2, but it opened the eyes of many to recognize the need. The second was the growing need for Christian literature, and this was answered in the visit of Mr. Upson of the Nile Mission Press and of Mr. McNeuram, editor of a large secular publishing company, who took the keenest interest in their printing and provided them with an up-to-date printing press of their own. Before she died, she was able to link up officially with the Nile Mission Press and know this great burden would be carried forward. Her last book was beautifully illustrated, Sketchbook of Algeria, with notes attached, written to make people care. It got struck for a time, and then, suddenly, it tumbled out. I hardly know how, but I hope it was because its time had come, for it came in a shower, as fast as laggard hands and eyes could keep up with it. Her last project, which saw partial fulfillment in her lifetime, was that of a house for men trainees, where new converts could shelter and work and learn from the lines of a native Zawiya. The need was desperate. Another young convert from Tozer, Mimbarak, had been expelled from home, and the ladies could not take him in. He wandered to Souz, but failed to find work, and was ultimately reduced to sleeping in a wheelbarrow in the marketplace. 2 others, students, Calby, had fled from their homes and were working as bricklayers without teaching or fellowship. The Colporteur expeditions had brought to light hosts of eager inquirers who might not be visited again for years. Mr. Tatley, a relative new recruit, told of amazing scenes in crowded cafes in the Baosada area. He reported, "The old spirit of bitter antagonism seems waning, and in its place there is a spirit of listening and receptiveness. We could almost see the crumbling walls when one man cried out so despairingly, 'What am I to do with a dead Muhammad?' Turning to the crowd, he repeated the question, but only silence answered him." Mabel Grautoff in Milana had wrote of a Marabout priest who knocked on her door at dusk and said, "I am a secret believer. I have 3 Gospels, and I read them at night." She gave him a New Testament and a 7-fold secret, but he wanted more. "If I go to your Zawiya, will they take me in?" he asked. "Oh, for a hostel," wrote Mabel. "It was difficult for me here alone. He asked to bring his disciples next day, and I said, 'Yes, but not after dark.' He did not come." But the vision was beginning to take shape, for a new house was growing up in Darnama land, under the expert direction of Pierre Nicod, who brought Lilias frequent photographs of its progress. She saw it not only as a shelter, but as a center for deeper teaching, for many of those creative hours with God were spent in looking back and learning from the past. She wrote, "I believe that among so many other points where we have failed is that, looking at our new converts, we have sometimes felt that the teaching of the Spirit's infilling and outflowing lay beyond their comprehension. Yet in the early days of the church, the deepest teaching was given to those barely out of the grossest heathendom, and they throve on it." It was a terrible blow when Mr. Teeley, who had been one of those selected to lead the work in the new house, was forbidden to come back to Algeria owing to the effect of strong sunlight on his failing eyesight. He had left so full of hopes and plans, though his last months abroad had been hampered by continual suffering. Lilias took a quiet day to readjust her outlook, and the verse, "Jesus himself knew what he would do," ended her questionings. The house grew. The solution was not given once, but God was answering their prayers for new recruits. Young Franklin and Barrows had applied from England, and Salvador Lull, who had grown up in the country, was one also training to return a full-time worker. He had already joined some of the Colporteur expeditions, and of him had been. He spoke to the Arabs with a great tact, and I was astonished to find that it was the first attempt at Colporteur work. He might have been doing it all his life. He later became a mighty power for God in the land until his sudden death in 1950. Then, in January 1928, God showed the way. Theobald's offered to go and live in the new house with the new candidates engaging Imberich and another convert, C. Tahir, as language teachers. At the same time, these young believers would be given serious theological instructions. It would limit distant colportage work only to multiply it in the future. So, on March 26, the House of Dawn was dedicated to God, just a fortnight after the 40th anniversary of Lilias's arrival in the land. Blanche was especially remembered in praise and gratitude, and then they toured the house, dedicating each separate room to the Lord, with little Edmund Buckingham insisting that the roof should be included. Lilias commented, "And well he might, for they tell me it is a glorious place for any who wish to go up on the housetop and pray. May this be its vocation." So she rested and prayed and saw visions, many of them only to be fulfilled in the far future, many still unfulfilled. But that did not dismay her, for she had learned to wait. She loved to quote, "It is good that man should both hope and quietly wait. I never saw till recently how that word both exactly strikes the balance so needed in Muslim work. Some of us rush ahead with our hopes and are downhearted when they crumble, having never learned to quietly wait. Others go on quietly waiting for a lifetime without much of the spring of hope anywhere. Both hope and wait, in quietness and confidence. That is the answer." And for her dear converts as well, as for her projects, she was willing to wait, remembering Moses. "I am slow of speech and slow of tongue," said Moses, "but 40 years with God the shackles fell away, and he broke out not only into speech but into song, that wonderful swan song with which he left this earth, and which will echo on and on over the sea of glass, the song of Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the song of the Lamb. God can do wonderful things if we would only give him time." But time for her was nearly over. She was already standing on the brink of eternity.